Summer was drawing to an end, and my most recent car-themed adventure involved boarding a Friday evening flight, landing, faffing around at the airport for a while before spending the night on the edge of a cliff, next to an enormous bronze cow. No, this wasn't some oddly tame hallucinogenic experience fueled by ODing on the antimalarials. This was no tropical paradise I was to wake up to, but a real paradise nonetheless, even though it was a rather chilly 6 degrees that morning. There was beautiful scenery and some of the best driving roads in Europe, I'd been told, and it only seemed right to explore them before the snowy winter set in and the routes became, well, let's say, dysfunctional. If you haven't guessed it already, this is the Highlands of Scotland, a contender for the most beautiful part of the British Isles, and so if you're a southern pansy, as the Scots so affectionately say, you're as far away from southern England, as the crow flies that is, as Switzerland is. This driving mecca certainly hasn't gone unnoticed, and already by 9 in the morning, several generations of Ferrari were fueling up at one of the smallest petrol stations I'd ever seen, ready for a day of exploration and pure hedonism. I have to say, I was a little bit jealous. I wasn't sure my carriage of choice was quite going to match up.
The Highlands and Islands of Scotland really are home to some of the best driving roads that Europe has to offer. And I'm currently sat in a car with which we're going to be exploring these roads with. So what car would you take to the Highlands to explore such beautiful scenery and fantastic roads? Well, something quite appropriate would probably be something British, so maybe a Noble M600, that would be pretty good. A Lotus Elise, any kind of TVR, any kind of Caterham. But the problem is if you're here on holiday, as I am, and you've got a load of camping stuff in the boot, so you've got sea kayaks, tents, sleeping bags, all sorts, then you're going to need something a little bit bigger and probably more boring. And furthermore, if you've flown here, as I have, you're kind of at the mercy of what the car rental company is going to give you.
Predictably, the car was neither glamorous nor exciting, but it was very, very popular. Built in Sunderland and one of Britain's best-selling cars, it's the Nissan Qashqai. It's almost 10 years old now, and whilst the first generation really set the agenda for all the crossover SUVs that have come since, it always was a little bit awkward looking. It's totally subjective, but this second generation car really is quite handsome. It blends curves with angular details to give it the road presence and appeal of an SUV, while still, allegedly, returning the economy you can expect from a family hatch. That's not a bad recipe. But whether you think it looks dashing or decidedly dumpy, what's it like to drive? And what's it like to live with? Furthermore, will you regret, on roads such as these, not having a smaller, nimbler, B-road-loving hatchback? Will this Qashqai be a turn out for the books? Let's find out.
So we're just about to go over the Skye Bridge from mainland Scotland over to the Isle of Skye, where we're going to do some whisky tasting over at the Talisker distillery, the famous distillery, on the west coast of Skye. And in the meantime, we are going to test out the car.
The range caters for numerous budgets, with prices starting at $18.5 grand and making its way up to a whopping £29,000. The test car was the trim level known as Techno, which translates to it having most of the bling on the outside and most of the luxury and gadgetry on the inside. It was a two-wheel drive version with a 1.5 litre diesel engine and a 6-speed manual gearbox. On the road, it will set you back a tenner short of 26 grand. First up, performance and handling.
Well, the first thing I've got to say about it is that the suspension on this car is really, really great from a comfort perspective. Even with these massive alloy wheels that it's got on all blinged up, I think it does just soak up the bumps incredibly well. And when you're going around a corner, and even if you hit a pothole at speed, it soaks it up, and it does inspire a bit of confidence, which is really good to see. It's also got a hell of a lot of different systems to try and keep this really big, heavy car of 1,860 kilograms on the road. It's got this thing called active trace control. Jesus, it's very foggy. Which basically tries to alter the braking on each wheel when going around a corner to try and give it a bit more stability and it stick to the road a little bit better. Well, there's a series of corners coming up. I'm going to test it out. Going around here now, it's slightly greasy and that is horrible, but it's not really the fault of the car. It is gripping on well. There's just a lot of feedback that comes through the wheel. You don't really know what the front wheels are properly doing, but I think the systems do work fairly well. I feel like for a car of this size it could quite easily be a lot worse than that. There's not an awful lot of body roll. One thing I really do like is the way that you can scroll through the systems as I've done and actually weight up the steering in sports mode, which is really quite good. It makes a big difference. It feels a bit more eager to turn in. I'm not sure if it really does that, but it certainly feels better. So yeah, I'd say all in all, the systems actually do a remarkably good job of keeping the car on the road and controlling it. I wouldn't say it's super fun going around corners by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually more fun to drive it slowly, I think, and just enjoy the road for what it is.
I shan't spend long on the performance. The test car had the 109 horsepower 1.5 litre diesel that delivered 260 Nm of torque and covered the 0 to 60 dash in a rather pedestrian 11.9 seconds. Only the larger petrol engine can crack the 9 seconds mark, but then performance isn't really the reason why you buy a Qashqai. Most buyers won't really want to know there's even an engine in there at all. And that's a big part of the reason why this unit is often said to be the pick of the bunch, because for a 4-pot oil burner, it's remarkably quiet. But it's not just big on refinement, but economy too. And whilst I was only getting about 40 to the gallon when pushing hard, when driving gently, I was getting close to the remarkable 70 mpg figure claimed on the spec sheet. That's seriously impressive for a car of this size.
So that's really as much as I want to say about the performance and the handling. We're going to stop now and go for a little fresh and rather chilly dip in a thing called the Ferry Pools.
This place is a bit of a tourist trap, so the best way to experience it is simply to take leave of your senses, and of course your clothes, and drop down into the icy, gin-clear waters for an invigorating splash about. Afterwards, the obvious choice to warm up was the cosy pub. However, in a decision walked by my frozen brain, I thought it a good chance to have a look around the Nissan's pleasant and roomy cabin.
Well, after that, I'm pretty cold and pretty damp. So I think the first thing to mention is the fact that this particular trim model has got some heated seats, which are pretty great, but then they are an optional extra, so they're only available on the top spec model unless you actually optionally go for them. But first things first, as soon as you get into the cabin, you're in quite a 4x4 style cabin in the sense that things are quite high up off the ground. You've got that kind of elevated seating position, although luckily you can actually adjust using the electric seats up and down to get a slightly lower position in the car for better drivability. It's got a lot of this kind of black, shiny, glossy material which looks okay. The rest of the cabin materials where you've got this kind of soft leather type material, it's not actually leather but it's not bad. The rest of the cabin is pretty solidly built. I keep whacking it, but that's kind of a good test to see how well a cabin is actually designed from a materials point of view anyway. Through here you can do things like the sat nav. You can also adjust a lot of the controls of the car, which is quite impressive really. You've got apps here. It's a very techie sort of consumerist type car, if that makes any sense. So you've got things like Facebook and Google searches. I mean, don't really know why you want to do that through your car interface, but it's available to you. You've got a thing that says your eco score, which I don't fully understand really. It doesn't seem to have any actual context to it, so who knows what that really means. On this model as well, you've also got the dual climate control, which is pretty good, dual system. I quite like the digital display here, it looks quite good quality. The seats are made of leather, and the ones with the kind of perforated holes in it. And one thing I really like about this car is the glove box thing, which is really deep, which sounds like a bit of an odd thing to say, but it does make a big difference having a lot of space down there, and this car is a lot about practicality, so that's very commendable. Also from a practicality point of view, the boot's got plenty of space. It's also got like a tray that's underneath the boot which you can store slightly more precious items in, like laptops and any of that kind of thing, which I think is a really good feature of the car. A couple of other things I don't really like about the interior. I think the steering wheel, given that the rest of the dash is quite solid and good quality, the steering wheel just feels really tacky. You've got all of the controls to control this via the actual steering wheel itself, but they're really plasticky, horrible kind of thing that you might find on like an Argos TV remote, and it's just not particularly nice. It just looks like it's off a car that's not quite as good quality as this. Then the caveat to that is if you look through the steering wheel at the speedo and the rev counter, they're kind of set quite deeply back, they're chrome rimmed as well, and that just really enhances the feel of quality in the cabin too. On this particular trim level as well, you've got the panoramic glass roof, which is, I think, pretty nice. It lets a lot of light into the cabin, but the downside is you can't actually open it, but it's such a large piece of glass, there'd be no room for it to go anyway, so That's a nice feature. But I think where the cabin really comes alive is actually after dark. It becomes quite bright, and not in a garish way, but you get this kind of mood lighting around the side. And if you live in the UK, you're going to be driving around in the dark quite a lot, so I think you'll very much appreciate that. So all in all, a good cabin.
The Talisker distillery was just a few miles away now, and whilst the last few hours had been far from long enough to constitute a comprehensive test, it has certainly been long enough to get a proper sense of what this Qashqai was all about. It was a story, like any other, of pros and cons. The build quality and styling, both inside and out, the refinement of the engine, and the remarkable fuel economy that could be achieved make this car a great success. But whilst it may be an undeniable success, it brought me back to the question of whether I felt disappointed at not having something a bit more fun. In just 3 hours of driving, these Scottish roads have provided all the driving delights you could ask for, ranging from fast-flowing curves to tight hairpin bends. Obviously I wasn't meaning fun in the supercar sense, or even in the sports car sense. I really just meant fun in a kind of lukewarm, hatchback kind of way. Unsurprisingly though, with a rather pathetic power-to-weight ratio of 57 horsepower per tonne, the Nissan failed the fun test with flying colours. All too often I was frustrated at having to change down several times as it struggled to haul its almost 2-tonne mass up some fairly small hills. In the corners, I was actually quite impressed about how the systems managed the body roll, but pushing it any more than about 6/10 still didn't make for an enjoyable drive in a way that would be easily achievable in a traditional hatchback that was half a tonne lighter and probably cost less too. This is rapidly becoming a critique of crossover cars more than it is about the Qashqai itself. But for me, the practicality argument doesn't really add up. The boot size is actually smaller than some of the most roomy hatchbacks on the market, and at the cost of 26 grand, I think there's better options out there. For practicality, Nissan's own X-Trail will give you 7 seats and lots more room starting at 25 grand. If it's performance you're after, the rapid Ford Focus ST is 2 grand cheaper, and if it's brand snobbery, the BMW 1 Series and the Mercedes A-Class start around the same price as well. The thing is though, none of this really matters. For the literally millions of people that have bought the Qashqai over the years, the elevated driving position, the plethora of driver assistance technologies, and the simple fact that it's a crossover are just some of the reasons why it's been such a great success. And it may not be my cup of tea, but the useful side effect was that it's fueled my desire to return to these roads again soon in order to drive something a bit more lively.